Like, where are you in how you feel about editing versus being your full self?
I mean, just code switching, just that alone. I've seen a lot of discussion about it on LinkedIn, and I think the assessment is correct. Having to constantly monitor how you're being perceived is exhausting. It's emotional labor. Do you really want to add that on top of the job?
Sure. Yeah. I will say that we all have been incubated in the context of a group, right? Of this idea that we are part of a community. We all have been born into circumstances that we have no control over. And in those early days, we were in the presence of caregivers, mothers, fathers, aunties, uncles. And in the context of family, we learned how and in what context and in what situation we could or should show up. And so we have a lot of experience just as an individuals in a family living in society. We are familiar with changing how we show up in order to belong, right? And so I am one of 4 siblings. In moving between my mother, my stepfather, my cousins, they were different shades of me that I put out depending on who I was with. When you start going to the playground and you're making friends and you're sort of trying to be on the inside, there are ways in which you alter, you stretch yourself in order to belong. And I think that those are all growth experiences. Yeah. We do that in our social circles, and we also do it at work. Stretching yourself, changing yourself, modulating yourself to belong. Like, that isn't a bad thing. Code switching specifically is the modulation of yourself in the context of an environment where you feel as though you are being judged. And the degree to which you change and modulate is your pass into that group or that team or that company. That is something that we should not be proud of doing. But just because we're not proud of it doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. I've code switched for most of my professional career. Unconsciously, sometimes consciously.
It's part of the conditioning.
Yeah. How do you feel about that idea? The idea that individuals change their affect, change how they show up in contexts that are outside of work, and it's okay to do, but in the context where you are changing to in a perceived environment of bias or discrimination, that is where the peril of conformity exists.
Well, I think it's different if you're in an environment and the understanding is, well, you have to mimic us. It doesn't matter who you are. The way you present, you have to present as us. That's what I think is like, okay, whoops, we're not doing that.
Yeah. And, the peril for organizations and for leaders is that this happens all below the surface. And unless you are really tapped into your teams, unless you're really tapped into your understanding of social dynamics, it is very much invisible to organizations and leaders. But this idea of having an individual code switch in order to belong, or the idea of a model minority, is a real it's a peril for the organization.
It is. You touched on family earlier, and I'm like, see my notes, because I want to talk about family too. I want to talk about team versus family and the myth of belonging. So companies love to say we're a family all the time, right? But families don't do performance reviews, and you don't get laid off if there's an issue.
Right.
So I want to ask you, have you ever worked somewhere where they sold that idea of family? And then what happened when things started to go wrong?
Sure. I just kind of getting back to what I was saying earlier about, like, I think it's okay to give language to ways to describe how people come together, how groups come together. And we use language like teams to describe how groups come together in the context of work when they're pursuing some sort of goal.
Yep.
We use the language of family to describe the context of individuals in a group where the goal really isn't pushing towards some sort of objective or pushing towards some sort of goal, but it's around how you use your influence.
Okay.
And I think that inside of an organization, leaders start by describing groups as teams, and that's totally fine, right? Teams give power through authority, and you have leaders who are giving strategy and direction to the team to execute. In order for teams to execute, they need to see and treat each other like a family. They need to rely on power that is soft power.
Okay.
Rely on influence, rely on the strength of a relationship. And I think what happens is it gets muddy because we're using the words team and family to describe the pursuit of something. And from a leader's perspective, they see it as just a grouping of people. But the individuals who are members of that team, they don't see themselves as just individuals. In order to push together and to accomplish very difficult things, you have to see your teammates as more than just individuals. You need to see them as real people.
Yeah.
And in doing that, you build connection, you build trust, you become vulnerable, and you get feelings involved. And those feelings resulting stronger connections. And those stronger connections make really effective teams. What happens in moments when the business is doing great and thriving, it is okay to lean on the idea of a team and a family. But what happens when businesses experiences headwinds? And as you point out, they have to let go of team members, family members. I don't think leaders understand the emotional toll that takes on individuals on a team when they see their colleagues being let go. From the leader's perspective, it's just, hey, we're a team. That person is just another individual in service of a larger goal. But the actual people working in that group don't see them as just a body. They see them as someone that they are working shoulder to shoulder with that is no longer there. And there's a lot of hurt that goes along with that.
Yeah. I once worked at a company, and it was a pretty large company with a lot of divisions. So they referred to themselves and us collectively as employees, as family all the time. And I don't think that's uncommon, right? A lot of companies do that. And I think it kind of boded a sense of unity, right? We're one. Even though we're big, we're still one. Recently, though, I felt like a lot of people got a wake-up call because it's so easy to buy into that family concept because you are with your coworkers day in, day out. Sometimes you spend more time with your coworkers than you do your actual family, right? 100%. So you buy into this concept of family, but this is where I feel like it got a little twisted. When chief diversity officers were being let go left and right, that's when I think the idea of family was challenged.
Sure.
Because these chief diversity officers helped these companies win in a critical time for this country following the murder of George Floyd, right? And they helped steer the ship in the right direction, working on diversity, equity, inclusion, representation, getting multicultural marketing right. So it was like so crazy to see these people who helped you win at this critical and pivotal moment, now all of a sudden, when these things no longer serve you, now you're exiting them through the back door?
Yeah. And
what kind of family is that?
Right. And a lot of times it's done unceremoniously. It's done under the cloud cover of just general cuts. And it does hurt for sure. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was. What I was going to say is that I think that the word family in the wrong hands of the wrong kind of leader can be weaponized, because it can guilt an employee into feeling like they need to stay, they need to endure, they need to overextend, all for the sake of the family. So I don't really like that word. I'm a little suspicious of that word. Yeah. Oh, we're all a family. Are we now? I second guess it now.
Sure. I mean, you think of how many passes we have given family members, irrespective of their behavior, just because they are family. And so the word family does have some really powerful ties to our heart. And in using that word, I don't want to say you're manipulating, but you are tapping into a set of motivators that allow people to go above and beyond. I think a way that we may be able to kind of reconcile the language of team and family is to have leaders expand their thinking about and of their teams as more than just cogs. I think if leaders expanded their repertoire of skills and motivators and motivations to include being empathetic, to include being vulnerable, to include actively building trust with their team, in moments when you have to make hard choices about the business, if they see the same characteristics that is being modeled in the actual group, if they see their leaders modeling those characteristics, the news of having to let go of certain team members feels a lot less harsh than when it comes from a leader who doesn't have a real set of real skillfulness around soft skills.
Yeah. And, your family is people who share your last name, but your family is also people who show up for you, not the people who constantly expect for you to show up and show out and perform. And I think that's a key differentiator.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I think just this idea of family and team is such a really interesting way to understand your place in organizations. And in the workshops that I do, I lean heavily and spend a lot of time really talking about how family, how our early experiences with connection and bonds with our caregivers in the context of home shapes how we see and understand power, how we see and understand the roles that we play, how we see and understand our own voices. And the point that you just sort of raised about, family may include changing your last name. And we sort of begin our life in one family context. And as we move through life and we meet our partners and we decide to reconstitute family in a new way, we take on new names as a way to signal that we are part of something new. It doesn't mean that the first family that you were born into goes away. It just means that you're creating a branch. And, and I kind of think about having to leave an organization and go somewhere else, right? This attaching and reattaching to colleagues as you move from one organization to another is a form of kind of recreating a new family.
Yeah.
And that detachment is not trivial at all. Even if it's voluntary, there's some discomfort in leaving an organization. So you can imagine in the context of leaving during a crisis, a business crisis, or something else, that those wounds, that sort of distress, that damage is not something that is easily healed.
Mm.